Hello and welcome to Learn How to Program Perl, Lesson 1. We're going to be going over how to get started with Perl, the Hello World program, taking user input, and conditionals. So the first thing I want to go over is human versus programming languages. We humans will often read past mistakes. For instance, if I say my name, Chris, you'll probably read that pretty easily as my name is Chris. Your mind just fills it in for you. However, a computer can't figure out your mistakes. If you type this line of code, which is incorrect, it won't know to read it as this line of code. It's not going to be able to figure that out. Okay, so there are a couple of main types of programming languages. The first type is compiled language, and that means the binary of your program, the strings of ones and zeros that a computer will actually read, will be created before you run your program. So you actually have to wait. If you have a 10,000 lines of code in your program, it has to compile each of those 10,000 lines before it can run it. And then if there's an error, then you've just wasted that time. An interpreted language interprets your code line by line and turns it into binary as it goes. So you don't have that extra step. And Perl is an interpreted language, and generally developing with an interpreted language is a bit faster because you don't have to be waiting around all the time. And there's a few things that you'll need to follow along in these tutorials. The first one of them is the Perl interpreter itself. And if you're on Mac OS X or a Linux distribution, you already have Perl installed, so you don't actually have to do anything. But do note that Mac users will possibly have some trouble later on when we get to more advanced things that will require compiling software from source, which if you don't know what that is, that's okay, but just know that you might need to install a Linux virtual machine or go through some extra processes if you're on Mac OS X later on in the course. You'll also need a text editor. If you're on Windows, something simple like Notepad or WordPad will do, or you can also get a programming editor like Notepad++, which is very good. For Linux users, gedit, LeafPad, anything of that nature is fine. And Mac OS X users can use Text Wrangler, TextMate, or something like Komodo Edit. All those are completely free. But don't use TextEdit because you won't be able to save the files properly and it won't work. You're also going to need a terminal, which for anyone who doesn't know is an old-fashioned way of communicating with your computer. It uses text input. So you type in commands and programs run that way instead of having icons and mouse input and that sort of thing. If you're on Mac OS X, you can just find the terminal application. It should be installed on your computer. Linux users will have something like terminal or term or something of that nature. It depends on your Linux distribution. And on Windows, just use the command prompt. You can also get Cygwin, which will simulate a Linux terminal environment, and then you can follow the commands that I am using. So these commands that I will be showing you today in terms of running your program won't entirely be applicable on Windows, so you would have to reference the website for those specific commands, because I'm not using Windows here. But if you get Cygwin, you should be able to follow along just fine. And if you have any questions about anything that I'm saying, just ask in the comments. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start coding now. So this is Komodo Edit. And don't be frightened if this looks a little overwhelming right now. You can use whatever program you feel comfortable with, but this is what I'm going to be using as my text editor today. So the first thing we want to do in our Perl program is put in 2 lines of code that will reduce the ability to make errors. So we're going to say use strict and use warnings. And each line should end in a semicolon. Now we're going to save this. We'll put it in Documents. And let's do, I'm going to call this hello lesson.pl. Should always save it with a .pl extension. You'll notice that the colors just changed. This is called syntax highlighting. And what it does is it just makes it easier to see the different elements of my code. And these numbers over here are just line numbers. They won't show up in the program. Excuse me. So just to show you, this is how you make a comment. Just the number sign. And this is just so that you or other programmers can see your code and understand, get explanations, that sort of thing. You can also use it if you want to temporarily disable a line of code. Okay? So it's just a number sign. You can put it anywhere on a line. Now, we just want to make the terminal say hello world. So we're going to do print and then space, a double quote, and my program is handy enough to fill in the other double quote for me, but you might have to add it in by hand. And then we're going to add hello world. Okay, and we'll save that. Now it's time to move into the terminal. So go ahead and open your terminal. And this right here is what we call a command prompt. It's just what allows us to take a new command input into the terminal. Depending on your operating system and the terminal program you're using, yours might look a bit different. Now, we need to move into the directory where I save this. In this case, it's my documents directory. So I'm going to type cd space tilde, and that's a shortcut for my home folder, and then documents. Now I want to run the program, so I just do Perl hello lesson.pl. Okay, now you might not even see this. It put hello world right there, and it runs into our command prompt. It looks really tacky, and it's almost unreadable, almost unnoticeable sometimes. So what we're going to do is tell Perl that we want to insert a new line after hello world, so that it does that before it exits, and we don't have that mess going on. All I have to do for that is put a new line tag, which we notate with \n. Okay, and we'll save that again. And you can just hit up arrow to insert the previous command into the terminal and press enter. And now we have hello world. Okay. Now, let's say we want to take text input from the user. And by the way, I actually should have had a semicolon here. It was the last line, so it didn't really matter. But as a matter of habit, you should always put semicolons. Alright, now, we want to take input from the user. So let's say we want to ask them what their name is. Okay, so we'll first print the question. Print, what is your name? Put a new line, end it with a semicolon. Now, we need to store this in what's called a variable. And there are a few types of variables. The first one is a scalar. Put a number sign there so I comment it. And a scalar holds a single value. And it's denoted by the $sign. The next type is an array, which holds multiple values. And it's denoted by an @ sign. Okay. And then there's also the hash, which also holds multiple values, but it's different. the way it organizes them is different, to be specific, and we denote this with the %sign. Now, we only need one value here because the person only has one name. So, we're just going to make a scalar, and the way we do that is we declare it with the word my. So my nom, I'm going to purposefully misspell that because in some languages name is a word that invokes a command, and we want to make sure that we don't have any issues. It would probably be fine to spell it name, but just to be safe. Then we're going to put an equal sign, read line, stdin, semicolon. stdin stands for standard input. Okay. So, in this case, that is the keyboard. We could technically set that to something else, but by default, standard input means we're taking info from the keyboard. Okay. And let's say we want it to be printed back to us. So we do that with print, double quote, name of the variable, and a new line. Okay. So, run that again. What is your name? My name's Chris. Okay. And it gave it back to us. And you'll notice there's an extra new line here. The reason for that is that when you press the enter key, it makes a literal new line tag in the variable. So, in Perl, this is actually Chris \n. Now, there are a lot of times when that isn't going to be what we want. So, in this case, it's fairly harmless, but there are a lot of cases where that can wreak havoc. So what you're always going to want to do is use a function, which is just a built-in command in the program, essentially, called chomp. Built-in command in the language, excuse me. Okay, so chomp nom. Now what this will do is actually remove the \n. By the way, these parentheses are optional. We could also use parentheses in the print command. I, as a rule, don't. In terms of the syntax or whatever, you don't need to. Although, formally speaking, it would be more proper. It's kind of up to you in this scenario. So we'll run that again. What is your name? Chris. And it works. So we only have the one new line, and that is all we want. So now, let's say we want to do, just check what's next here. Okay, so now let's talk a bit about conditionals. And what we're going to try to do here is just make some different, scenarios where the program checks if something is the case and then lets us know. So let me just talk a little bit about what I'm saying. So we'll make a new file, save it as conditionals.pl. Okay, now a conditional is an if-then statement. So if today is Tuesday, then I have to go to work. That's a conditional. So we can do the same thing in Perl. So we can say if condition is met, do this action. Okay, now let's take a number from the user. So we'll say print, enter a number. \n. Make sure we put a semicolon on there. And then we'll put my num equals readline stdin chomp num. Okay, now let's say something simple. We just want to check, is the number less than, greater than, or equal to 10? Okay. So we'll just do it like this. If, and it's actually, my editor is smart enough to know what the construction for this is, so it's just giving me the fields where I can fill it in. If num is less than 10, print it's less than 10. And this is a situation where you don't necessarily need a semicolon because it is just one line between these brackets. Okay, but I'm going to put it anyway because it's more proper. Else if, and it's going to be the same syntax. Oh, it didn't fill that in. That's annoying. Okay, else if num is greater than 10, print it's greater than 10. Okay, just like that. And there's only 3 possible scenarios here. If it's not greater than or less than 10, it has to be 10. So we can just use the else, which says if none of the above conditions are true, follow what this says. So else print it's 10. Okay. So we'll run this. Perl conditionals.pl. Enter a number. 25. It's greater than 10. Enter a number. 5. It's less than 10. One more time. Enter a number. 10. Hey, it's 10. Alright. So, again, the construction for one of these is if, or else if, parentheses, condition that you want to check against, end parentheses, curly bracket, code that you want to execute if condition is met, and ending curly bracket. Same thing for else if, and the else if will be checked in the event that the if isn't met. You can have an infinite number of else ifs. An else only requires the opening bracket, the action, and the end bracket. You can only have one else. Okay. Now, let's take that name scenario again. So we'll do print, what is your name? And my num, it's the same thing that we already did. Readline, stdin. Now we'll do if num eq. Okay, Some languages use equal equal, double equal sign. But in Perl, because this is going to be a string, it's going to be text characters and not just a number like 10 or 15, whatever it may be. We have to use EQ. If nom EQ Chris print yay, I love Chris. Okay. Else if nom EQ Anthony. Print nice to see you, Anthony. And I think I missed the \n on this one. And just make sure we have all our semicolons. That's the easiest way to make a mistake. And if it's neither Chris or Anthony, then we want to print I want Chris or Anthony. Okay, so we'll just run this again. Enter a number. 250. It's greater than 10. What is your name? Sarah. I want Chris or Anthony. Okay. And what's your name? I made the mistake myself. We never chomped this. So, when I just typed Chris, it actually read Chris \n. This does not account for that. So, it actually didn't meet the if. So, that's easy enough to fix. We just do chomp, nom, and we're good to go. Yay, I love Chris. So that is the basic system, basic thing that we're doing here. And that's that. So, great seeing you guys, and come back again next time.